Alright, you guys, this episode of Paradigm Profiles is called Nuestra Raza's 14 Bonds. This is a complete and full breakdown of the Nuestra Raza's 14 bonds. The 14 bonds are everything NR members need to know in order to function within that movement. The expectations, conduct, rules, and regulations are all laid out in the bonds. I used to liken it to my own little toolbox. All the things I needed to know in order to function and meet the expectations within this movement. This breakdown will be a clear and concise breakdown of the 14 bonds and how they were taught to me. I'll do my best to make this as comprehensive as I can, especially for those of you who have never seen or read the bonds. However, I just want to make it inherently clear that if I was breaking these down for NR members in an actual class, my descriptions would be a lot more in depth than what I'm giving here. Bond number 1. All Norteños will strive for better education, respect, and social status of equality. This includes and goes beyond acquiring any and all incentives and privileges entitled to an inmate. This first bond is one of the most significant of the 14 bonds as it applies to every bond set forth. The NR movement as a whole is a movement that was founded on bettering the raza and all endeavors achievable, i.e., meaning attaining intensive mental and physical training, respect both in actions and in words, and acquiring social status of equality. Taking a strong interest in becoming more educated is nothing too complex to understand. It's self-explanatory. It is what it is. It's taking whatever steps is necessary in order to become more knowledgeable and more educated in a variety of topics. It's also understanding that this is a lifelong process. You can never become too educated. But this is not just limited to just studying the 14 bonds, the NR plight, weaponry, covert communication, Gray's Anatomy, mainline training, and street activities. It's also going above and beyond that to just become a smarter, more educated individual. In other words, it's not only about absorbing and sponging up NR related curriculum, but this also encompasses a broad area of topics that will enhance your knowledge with respects to whatever it is you're talking about. Areas that are outside the confines of this movement. The NR encourages other trainings such as studying Middle Eastern philosophy and revolutionary inspired books such as Sun Tzu, The Art of War, Mao Tse-tung, A Look at Guerrilla Warfare, Socrates, Che Guevara, George Jackson, Robert Greene, The 48 Laws of Power, etc., etc. This helps to develop the militant and guerrilla warfare mentality that the movement is structured and predicated on. Reading a dictionary for the purpose of strengthening and improving your vocabulary are all ways in which one can pursue to become betterly educated. Taking an interest in improving and enhancing one's own curriculum should not only be effectuated because it is a mandatory part of the NR training, but each and every member should be striving to elevate his own educational endeavors, as this is a part of improving yourself, you as a knowledgeable individual. Having the ability to speak on a higher level with an advanced vocabulary should be something every member strives for. Taking a strong interest in advancing your own physical training and conditioning is also as equally important. A strong mind has to be predicated on a strong body. One without the other is synonymous to having a brand new car with an empty tank of gas. Your mind may be committed and dead set on fulfilling some of the physical endeavors, but if your body isn't strong and you lack the physical attributes in order to accomplish it, what's the point? This comes from investing hours of rigorous physical training, burpees, calisthenics, weight training, push-ups, running, and any other physical exercise that will help build strong cardio and physical conditioning. So the physical aspect of staying fit and in top-notch condition is just as critical as the mental aspect, and this is something that's always encouraged. Respect is another principal element of this bond that was extremely important when this movement was created. This was because of the abusements and the inflictions that Norteños were suffering at the hands of the opposition. Norteños were looked at as being inferior. They were called fameros and sodbusters because many of them were from small farm towns that lacked that hip city slicker swag that the opposition was accustomed to. So demanding and attaining respect became one of the chief elements that this movement was built on. This also called for absolute unity, together unified as a collective, marching to the beat of the same drum for the same purpose is how the Norteño spirit and the NR movement became strong. Social status of equality is about not only fighting for our rights, but it's also about getting what we got coming, and it's about getting our piece of the pie as well. If the Sureños, the Africanos, the Woods, and all other group segments out there on these main lines are enjoying some of the luxuries and privileges that make prison a more bearable environment, then we want these same luxuries and privileges too, period. If they have 6 phones, 2 handball courts, 4 benches, a designated workout area, and 3 designated rows of table to eat at in the chow hall, then we want ours too. If other group segments are getting unfettered access at some of the higher paying prison jobs, such as clerical, working in the canteen, working in the laundry, working in the vocational shops, etc., then we want a fair shake at that too. We want everything we got coming to us, period. These were things we couldn't allow to be compromised, desiccated, or manipulated for any reason either. It is the fundamental responsibility of all NR soldados to do whatever is necessary in order to make sure that the Norteño Raza are treated as equals. Anyone who opposes this or attempts to oppress the Norteño following is to be met with swift and immediate force. The NR are the guardians. They are the first and last line of defense for the Norteños. They are the first ones who will engage and act accordingly. Bond 2. All Norteños will take a strong positive attitude towards aiding and assisting all those of a Latin descent, as well as any other minority group worthy of our cause. It is our sole duty to work together in harmony and unite these forces in alliance with us to reach our set goals. This bond is another significant bond as it relates to many of the different relationships and the importance of how we interact and embrace others who are also of a Latin descent. Again, this is another example of how this movement's overall objective was to act as a guiding light and a pillar for all raza who were being subjected to the opposition's inflictions. It also demonstrates what the founders were trying to accomplish when this movement was created. This wasn't just about bettering and protecting the Norteño people and their allies. This was also about embracing other raza who were considered to be worthy. Raza that didn't buy into the propaganda and who were being victimized themselves. Cubanos, Boricuas, Mexicanos, El Salvadorians, Hondurans, Nicaraguenses, Panamanians, Ecuadorians, etc. Like my Spanish? Ace that shit. Those were the gente that were of a Latin descent, but the founders even took this a step further by including all other minority groups, Africanos, Asians, Samoans, American Indians, etc. They had a vision that included these other minority groups because at the time, the NR was in its embryonic stages. The revolutionary movement was in full swing. The Black Panthers, the Brown Berets, and other minority groups were banding together outside of prison, fighting for their rights and their freedoms in society. You guys got to remember that there was already somewhat of an alliance on the streets between groups like the Black Panthers and the Brown Berets when this war was developing between the MA and the NF behind the walls. So there was a spillover effect that transcended to the BGF and the NF. But again, the founders seen the potential in becoming catalysts for some of these other minority groups as well. If these minority groups and these groups that were of a Latin descent were like-minded insofar as bettering and protecting their people from other groups like the MA, who operated and preyed under the biggest bully on the block mentality, then they were embraced and considered to be worthy too. Like I said before, when I was being educated on the origins of the war, how it all started, and how the MA used propaganda as a tactic to recruit the Sureños, we were actually being told that the Sureños technically weren't even our enemies. That they only became our enemies because they bought into the MA's propaganda. The MA were the ones who were being identified as our real enemies. Furthermore, we were being told to embrace them on some level depending on their willingness to interact with us and also depending on whether or not they were receptive to our position. Believe it or not, even though we were in the midst of that war and the struggle back in the late 80s and 90s, there were a lot of Sureños who were opposed to raza, fighting and killing raza. and these were the ones we were trying to get through to. Bond 3. All Norteños will do everything within their reach and capability to acquire mainline status, for these are the grounds in which we must secure for our fellow Norteños and all those who live for our cause, to have a strong, established pinta to go to without the threat or interference of the opposition. This bond speaks about why it is important for all Norteños to do everything within their reach and capability to acquire mainline status. When this movement was created in the early 80s, it was critical at that time that every last Norteño who was capable of hitting the mainline did everything within his reach and capability to acquire his mainline status. The Carnales were emphatically pushing this strong because you've got to remember that most of them at that time were being slammed down in what was known as the 1976 validation clampdown. So they needed everyone there, all hands on deck. At the time, CDC claimed its sole purpose for effectuating this was to contain the war and to put a stop to the bloodshed. But the NF seen it differently. It seen it for what it really was. The NF looked at it as just another form of oppression, just CDC's way of locking up its people. And it came at a time when the NF felt like they were winning the war. You got to keep in mind that Norteños were also a minority, and this was another reason why it was critical that they made it out to these mainlines. There was a war escalating, and they were always in need of numbers. This also meant that all those who were being slammed down and unjustly locked up were also expected to pursue legal action and do whatever legal remedy necessary in order to challenge the veracity of why they were being slammed down. Instead of just allowing the system to treat you like you didn't have any rights or legal standings, you were expected to challenge and fight for what you had coming. Norteños were made to understand that they served no purpose being slammed down in the holes. They were worthless to the movement if they were locked up and put up on a shelf somewhere. They were needed on the main lines, as this was ground zero. The main lines were the grounds that needed to be secured and established so that the movement could fulfill its objective: to rid and remove any threats or any opposition that was attempting to oppress the Norteño people. That's what the cause was all about back in those days. The NF initially didn't have any interest in controlling the main lines so that it can control the drugs, the gambling rackets, and any of the other money-making ventures out there. That was the MA's objective. All the NF wanted to do was to protect his people, to take whatever steps were necessary in order to ensure that Norteños had places to go where they could do their time without threat or interference of the opposition. It's as simple as that. So that they could enroll in the educational and vocational programs and get trades, so that they could get some of the better paying jobs out there and take advantage of some of the luxuries that made time in prison much more bearable, so that they wouldn't have to worry about being bullied or dictated by the MA and their following, and just so that they could do their time comfortably on the main lines where they didn't have to worry about any threats or any other group segments that might have a negative agenda. The NF clearly had aspirations, like all the other groups, to become a self-solvent, self-sustaining, and self-supporting organization. But they were willing to coexist. They didn't want to just take it all for themselves, especially if that meant it came at the expense of oppressing other raza. That was never the NF's purpose. Bond 4. In order to continue in our struggle with far less obstacles, there will be no tolerance created by internal confrontation, individualism, or homeboy favoritism. No Norteño will spread false rumors or gossip about a fellow Norteño, and at no time will a Norteño attempt to take advantage of or disrespect a fellow Norteño's ruca or familia. To do so will result in serious repercussions. Unfortunately, some of the things that are mentioned in this bond have continued to be a major downfall and huge setbacks for this movement. All the things that it's attempted to weed out and eliminate were things that still continue to plague and cause major problems. Like this bond says, in order to move forward, to advance, and to focus on the movement's objectives, things like internal confrontations, playing favoritism, or individualism are things that can't continue to happen. Or when they do, more needs to be done to discourage and stop it. All these things are the basis for creating conflict. It should be well understood that we're not always going to like each other. There's going to be personality clashes, and sometimes you're going to lock horns with others. Sometimes there's going to be other ends that you're not going to like for a number of different reasons. either because someone's overly opinionated, arrogant, because of the way they carry themselves. Maybe they have character flaws, they're greedy, they brag, they talk too much, or it's painfully obvious that they only look out for themselves. Individualism. Whatever the case may be, there's always going to be others who you don't care for, and there's just no way around this. But for the purpose of harmony and equilibrium, for the purpose of unity, sometimes you have to put your personal likes and dislikes aside for the bigger purpose. And regardless of whether you like someone or not, you're still required to give them their due diligence and respect. It's usually those that don't have the ability to navigate through these things that get caught up in internal confrontations. This has often been referred to as red-on-red conflict. It's something that's always been a major downfall for Norteños. Although the entire spirit of the movement is predicated on unity, and unity is something that is consistently preached, the act of unifying is something that's just never been a strong suit for Norteños. Unfortunately, that's just a reality that's always been a major flaw. Turning and preying on other Norteños instead of the opposition is something that's been happening consistently over the years. We've always chose to target more of our own people than anyone else, and the numbers don't lie. Early on in my career, I myself participated in victimizing another Norteño. This was done at the direction of the acting authority in charge. I had to do it even though I knew it was wrong. It's discouraging, but nothing's ever been done to proactively stop it either. The mandate, known as El Norte Law, was probably the closest revision that was implemented with respects to ceasing this defect. But even then, this fell short and the core objectives were ignored. The whole Norteño movement has always been built and firmly founded on concepts like unity, carnalismo, and things like the betterment of the Norteño people. Yet, there's always division and conflict. And unfortunately, at times, this has even come up top, from the upper echelon itself. How can there possibly be any changes for the better or any advancement when those that should be leading by example are caught up in the same type of misconduct themselves? Homeboy favoritism or showing preferential treatment to someone because they're either from the same hood, they're related, or because you just have a lot of history with someone is something else that's caused a lot of internal problems in the past. Especially from a leadership perspective. You have to apply the same set of standards or the same set of rules across the board. You can't treat someone different based on the fact that you really don't care for him or because he might be from a hood on the streets that you might not like. I've seen this happen over the years with different people, and it was flagrantly applied. Someone was treated different based on who they knew or because they were close to someone who was in a leadership position. Or in situations where two people get brought up on the same charges, but they're treated different based on who they were. These are the types of things that need to be avoided. Another important part of this bond that has also been frequently disregarded is the portion pertaining to a fellow N's family, his wife, girlfriend, or significant other. I remember when I was first brought into the NR and I was going through my indoctrination. There was a lot of respect and emphasis placed on our families, our loved ones, and those that we held near and dear, such as our ladies. They were considered to be our purest reflections, and this is something that was taken very seriously. We knew that if we ever encountered or came into contact with a fellow N's family or his lady, that they would be treated with the highest degree of admiration and respect. This was taken very serious. But this isn't the case anymore. Instead of feeling confident that a brother that's being sent by your people's house has good intentions and that he's going to show them the type of respect that you would expect him to show, now you have to worry about this guy trying to spit game at your girl or trying to take advantage of your people in some kind of way. Instead of him going over there with good intentions, he goes over there with a foul agenda. You've reached a serious low point when you can't trust your own people with your loved ones. But that's what's happening, and it happens frequently. To make matters worse is that it's actually being tolerated or nothing is being done about it. Instead of holding the N involved accountable for his actions, the loyalty of the female involved comes into question. Excuses are made, and this creates more of the internal confrontation that is trying to be expelled. The question about whether someone's girl is loyal or not is irrelevant. That's between that brother and his girl. She's not the one who's committed to a structured movement where she's bound to uphold bylaws, policies, and protocol. Bond 5. All Norteños will acknowledge and respect the authority in charge at all times. No Norteño will feel inferior to one who holds rank or position, nor will a Norteño holding rank or position or some type feel superior over his fellow Norteño because of his status. This bond covers the importance of acknowledging all those who have been delegated a position of authority, as well as some of the ill effects caused by those who either feel inferior or superior. One of the many great things that sets the Norteño movement apart is the rank and file and the manpower's ability to operate under an intricate and well-refined leadership. This is where other groups have failed. This has been accomplished due to the NF adopting a paramilitary structure concept when it comes to its leadership, as well as an organized set of protocols known as the subdivisions, or basically the checks and balances. It's also credited to the NF's vigorous training and grooming practices that are constantly evolving. Those who have been delegated a position within the chain of command have been placed in these positions because they have either demonstrated strong leadership abilities or a higher level of intellectual stature. It doesn't mean that they are in any way superior over anyone else within the movement. It simply means that they have developed and that they are ready to take on this responsibility. Everyone needs to understand this. When someone has been selected to fulfill a position of authority, this isn't a reason for that individual to start displaying an air of arrogance or to feel like he has risen to a level of superiority. This is a character flaw, and this will undoubtedly be detrimental to his ability to effectively lead. Instead, someone who has been placed in a position should embrace this as a form of responsibility, nothing more, nothing less. In the same respect, no one should look at someone who holds a position of authority as if they're somehow below them or inferior to them either. These create negative mental blocks and complexes that interfere with the ebb and flow that are usually fluid between a leader and the manpower. This bond is cut and dry. There's not a whole lot to expound on, but like I said, one of the things that has separated the Norteño collective and has rarely ever become an issue is the acknowledgement of authority figures by Norteños. The entire movement is well aware of the fact that there's an authority in charge and that they're all compelled to conform to this authority. A great deal of time and effort is invested into indoctrinating the manpower insofar as the importance of this. They understand that when it comes to acknowledging and respecting the authority in charge, that nothing less than absolute conformity is tolerated. It's not a dictatorship and it's not about ruling with an iron fist. But when you have this type of order, where your manpower is not pushing back, they're not questioning or debating authority, and they understand the consequences of insubordination, then you're able to run a tight and effective ship. Bond 6. Any and all info and data pertaining to a new arrival shall be reported to its proper channel immediately. See household procedures, especially that which endangers a life or is contrary to the cause. This is another bond that is pretty straightforward, cut and dry. This defines the procedures and the protocols of what's involved whenever you're dealing with a new arrival. Again, here's another example of how well organized the Norteño collective is when it comes to some of its common everyday procedures. Whenever you're talking about a custodial setting such as a county jail, a prison, or any other type of establishment that is considered to be a household, there's always established procedures and policies in place whenever it comes to the management or handling of new arrivals. This is something that's taken very serious, and there's a lot of emphasis involved when it comes to this screening process. Anytime you have a new arrival that lands in your household, there's always going to be a level of threat involved, and there's always going to be a cause for caution. Regardless of whether this individual is known and regardless of the fact that he has a history, you still need to be careful and mindful that things are constantly changing. And for this reason, you just can never be sure about what might be involved. Since this individual last departed from the household, he could have started cooperating with law enforcement. He could have been placed in bad standings by another household, etc., etc. So you always have to subject any new arrival to the screening process, regardless of rank, status, or history. This entails running this new arrival's vitals, his name, hood, aka, age, current criminal charges, status, and history through the entire household. This means that all these vitals will be collected from this individual, and then they will be condensed in the form of a filter so that every member within that establishment gets to see it and then offer any and all data and information they may have on said individual. They're basically asked to provide anything and everything they might know about this individual, which will include his history, where he's been, his status, any former investigations he's been a subject of, the determination of that investigation, etc., etc. It's also standard protocol to run every new arrival's name through the BNL, Bad News List, or the NGN, No Good Norteño List. They're both analogous to each other to see if his name is recorded on this list. So for those of you who are not familiar with this or the policies involved, let me give you a quick breakdown. So whenever an NF member, an NR member, or a Norteño falls in bad standings, they're automatically placed on that household's BNL, and then this name is filtered out to other households so that they can record that name on their BNLs as well. This ensures that the BNLs are constantly being updated and that other establishments are made aware of this individual's bad standings. Every household maintains a current or updated version of a BNL so that they can effectuate this screening process. So that's how that part of it works. This bond basically just reiterates this process and emphasizes the importance of providing this info and data when specifically dealing with new arrivals. There's no cherry picking what info is provided either. It's anything and everything that one knows about any NAs that are being filtered. The last portion of this bond just again emphasizes the importance of the info, especially if this data may tend to endanger the life of someone or is in any way contrary to the cause's best interest. Bond 7. At no time will a Norteño endanger the life of a fellow Norteño. There shall be no fighting amongst Norteños, nor shall any cowardice dealings with the enemy be tolerated. To do so will be considered an act of treason. Bond 7 is a little more complex than some of the others, as it deals with a lot of different variables and some of the different acts that are considered treasonous. Let's cover the first part of this bond that says, at no time will a Norteño endanger the life of a fellow Norteño. I could give you guys example after countless example of how a Norteño can endanger the life of a fellow Norteño, but use your own imaginations. There's all kinds of different ways that this could be perpetuated, but what needs to be understood is that this includes both words and actions. From a leadership perspective, this means that you can't maliciously place a Norteño's life in danger. You can't send him on what's known as a kamikaze mission, where there's no chance of him coming out of that situation alive or where there's no possible chance of survival. Like I said, I could think of example after example, but here's just a few quick scenarios. If you're out on the yard and you create a situation with another group segment that could potentially lead to a conflict, but yet you fail to report it or put your channel on notice, this is clearly putting fellow Norteños in danger. If they get hit or rushed as a result and you didn't say anything, that's going to fall back on you and you're going to be held accountable. Let's say you end up getting into some type of personal disagreement with the opposition and you decide to take matters into your own hands by taking a piece out and hitting them as soon as they let you out for yard. You don't report this and you completely break policy by acting on your own accord. As a result, other ends end up getting rushed as a form of retaliation and as a direct result of your actions. This constitutes you endangering the lives of fellow Norteños. Now the next part of this bond is cut and dry. It specifically states that fighting with other ends is strictly prohibited, and although it doesn't specifically stipulate this, this is something that won't be tolerated or accepted. It's on each and every one of us to maintain our own sense of self-control. If you get into a heated debate with another end and you lose your sense of self-control by putting your hands on them, you're the one who's going to be dealt with. If you put your hands on another end, he has every right to protect and defend himself. There's a lot of different variables that come into play, and it'll be investigated and looked into, but usually it's the aggressor who gets dealt with. I've seen situations where both parties were dealt with because you had one who was clearly the aggressor, and then you had the other one who continued to antagonize and instigate it when he could have done more to de-escalate. A clear example of this would be what was known as the D facility dilemmas, where Big Smiley from Salinas and Pantero from San Jose perpetuated a personal war among C's, B's, and N's in D facility. Sides were chosen and this resulted in a lot of bloodshed. Both of these C's were charged with treason and were eventually expelled as a result. The final part of this bond that we still need to cover is what is considered to be cowardice dealings with the enemy or opposition. This could be anything from overly fraternizing with the opposition to the point to where it becomes suspicious and treasonous. Another good example of cowardice dealings would be something like this that I've heard happen quite a bit over the years. Let's say there's an ant out there on the yard that the opposition consider to be a threat. Maybe they just don't like this ant, or he's someone that's pushing a hard line. At some point, the opposition communicates this to another ant out there who's part of the leadership, or he's just someone who has a lot of influence. The opposition at some point lets it be known that this ant isn't welcome on the yard and that he has to go or there's going to be a conflict. Instead of taking up arms and striking at the opposition for even suggesting something like this, the ant is either told to leave the yard or they have the administration, the COs, roll this ant up to avoid the conflict. This is clearly cowardice dealings with both the opposition and the COs. No stand-up ant would ever entertain doing something like that. And if he was a stand-up ant, he would take up arms and move on whoever suggested doing something like that. Other forms of cowardice dealings with the opposition usually come into play over drugs. When leadership out there on these main lines have started indulging in the use of hard drugs, this is usually when scandalous shit starts happening. Working hand in hand with the opposition to set up ends because they're either pushing a hard line or have presented themselves as a threat because they've seen the treachery in their actions and have spoke out against it. These are all considered to be treasonous and cowardice dealings. I could give you guys more of these same types of examples, but it would just be redundant. Basically, whenever something is contrary to the philosophy and ideology of the cause or the struggle, it usually falls into the category of treason or cowardice acts. This concludes the first 7 of the 14 bonds. Due to the length of these breakdowns, this is going to be broken up into 2 parts. I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode of Paradigm Profiles. As I said above, due to the length of these breakdowns, this is going to be a 2-part profile. If I was breaking these down with actual NR members, these breakdowns usually wouldn't be this long because they're already familiar with some of the verbiage and some of what the bonds consist of. But due to the fact that I'm breaking this down to some of you who have never even heard of the bonds, I have to elaborate a lot more in layman's terms. With that said, I'm already working on the second part of this and I'll get it out to you guys as soon as I'm done with it. As always, we appreciate all the support, all the positive feedback, and of course everything that you guys have done as our viewers to help propel us to where we are today. We appreciate you and continue to acknowledge that without you, we would cease to exist.